Welcome to the Here Brotherhood podcast. So excited to have Dallas Hartwig on the show with us today. Welcome, Dallas.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dallas and I met just recently, actually, and discovered there's a whole wealth of content that we could dive into and talk about. And so I was excited to have you come on. I'll start by just reading this intro, and then there's a lot of jumping in spots from there.
Cool.
Okay, so Dallas co-created the Whole30. Some of you may have heard of this, followed this on social platforms. Co-authored the New York Times bestsellers. It starts with food and the Whole30. He started with the body, physical therapy, nutrition, functional medicine, 15 years teaching people to rebuild their health from the ground up. But the body is only the foundation. His work since has deepened into masculinity, meaning, and what it actually means to grow up as a man. And that's what we're here to talk about. So, and I do want to talk about that.
Sweet.
But before we do that, I do want to touch on the this nutrition and wellness and physical therapy is part of your training as well.
That was my
right?
original background, actually.
Okay.
I did grad school for PT and practiced as a PT for almost 10 years.
Nice.
And
Okay.
I had always had interest in like things outside of that, but that was my professional training.
Okay. So the Whole30 nutrition, just high level, like what are some of the main points that you would make? Because there's just a lot of trends, there's a lot of noise around what you should and shouldn't eat and how you should and shouldn't take care of your body and all this stuff. Like, are there just a few little nuggets that you're like, these are the things that would make the biggest impact?
Sure. So the Whole30 is a short-term experiment.
Okay.
It's an opportunity to kind of do a trial. It's fundamentally an elimination diet with a systematic reintroduction process. And it's based in the sort of evolutionary history of like, we lived in a world that didn't have packaged food,
processed,
high fructose corn syrup,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. And so the basic premise that's behind all of that is what humans are most well adapted to is the world that they evolved in over long periods of time. Now, the world as it exists now is very, very different than that. So the challenge is bridging that gap. And the Whole30 is a short-term experiment to help you figure out how to bridge that gap for you as an individual, because different people respond to things differently. So if we zoom out from the Whole30 as a short-term experiment, the deeper, broader principle there is eat the food that's been around for a really long time. And I mean a really, really, really long time. And so broadly speaking, my research and my experience, and certainly the experience of literally millions of people who've done the Whole30, is that people tend to do best on whole unprocessed foods, a mix of meat, eggs, seafood, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds, like stuff that's been around for literally ever. Things that you could hunt and forage, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
And so people are like, well, after all the, work you've done and learning and experiments, like what should we eat? I'm like, put meat and vegetables on your plate every single meal. That's it. And people are like, no, but what's the, I'm like, no,
what specifically?
That's it, And, there are large variations in how people do because of our genetic background, because of our health background. But really, truly, like that's the simple gist of it. Meat and vegetables on your plate with every meal. And then there's lots of room for flex there. And you can play with different things at different times of the year. My third book, The 4-Season Solution, talked a lot about the seasonal variability, not just in food, but in movement, in sleep, in sort of the light-dark exposure, that cycle, and how we engage with each other socially. So there's like all of those interlocking pieces there. So there's variation seasonally. There's the seasons of our life where we do kind of different things, which kind of gets a little bit into some of the like seasons of our life, masculinity, maturation stuff too.
Yeah, totally.
But with the food, I'm like, it really can be that simple. And people are like, well, what meat and what vegetables? I'm like, you choose. But it can be actually quite simple. And, probably with that one simple change, people get 80 or 90% of the benefit of any dietary program, full stop,
Cool. Yeah.
So it sounds like a cop-out answer, but like that's really the central piece of it.
No, I love the diagram that our mutual friend Carl Richards has of, and I've heard this reinforced in other schools of thought and even wisdom traditions. There's this idea of simplicity at the beginning, but it's kind of a basic simplicity, or maybe it's simplistic. I think that's the word. And then this line moves through this big jumble of messiness and complexity, but then out the other side, there's this like refined, elegant simplicity again.
Totally.
And that's what I'm hearing from
100%.
like, yeah.
And it's not to say that there isn't value in different macronutrient
Yeah.
ratios and different exercise approaches and matching up your dietary strategy with your movement pattern. Like that's all relevant. That's all important. That's all real. But if you want to get it like super, super, super distilled, it can be.
Yeah.
And you know, the Whole30 for millions of people, including myself, was an opportunity to clear away some of that noise and to be like, well, what do I make, you know, how do I make sense of all of these conflicting study conclusions and different experts claiming wildly different things?
Yes, there's so much of that.
And you experiment.
Yeah.
You figure out what actually works for you. And there's not a research paper in the world that can outweigh my own personal experience. So when you have personal experience and you pay attention to it and you learn from it, you can carry that forward and leave some of the noise behind.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is just all making me a little bit curious about what got you into this realm of, because I know nutrition is a big part of it, but it is broader than that. It's
Sure.
I think of more, I don't know how you would categorize it, but I'm just kind of seeing like wellness, maybe like sustainable,
Being a human.
being human. Yeah. Like true masculinity. Like what kind of led you into this path? Just a little bit of backstory.
Oh man, there's a lot of backstory. So the physical health piece, you know, was originally my professional background. That was the sort of like starting point. And I've always been kind of nerdy. I like reading research. I'm curious about things. I like just learning stuff for fun. So I've always been a big reader, both of books, but also primary research. And so my learnings in nutrition came out of personal interest and personal experimentation. And that then turned into a seminar series when I was living in New England at the time, and turned into a local seminar series, which then kind of caught fire, became a national seminar series, which became our first book. It starts with food, which became then it just sort of like took off and ran away from us. But really, the things that I write about and speak about is like a delayed commentary on my own lived experience in the preceding years. Like, so it's not a strategic, like I'm going to do this thing and then I'm going to do that thing. It's literally like what has changed my life in really powerful ways.
Yeah.
And once I've sort of processed that and made sense of that, then I can talk about it in public and write about it and speak about it, usually many years later.
Right.
So, you know, if you want to know what's been going on with me, you can just like wind the clock back and, you know, look at what I'm writing about and thinking about and speaking about and be like, oh, that's what he was doing 5 years ago in his own life.
Yeah.
So, you know, whether it's wellness, you know, and that's so many of these words, you know, holistic, that some of those kind of words are so abused, but that's being a human, right? It's the you know, the integrated way of living. And, you know, integrated, the word comes from the Latin integras, which just means whole. So when you think about holistic, like being a whole human is being integrated, which means all parts of our lives are coherent and in harmony with the other ones. And so inconsistencies and compartmentalization are the opposite of being a whole human.
Yeah.
And the world that we live in now makes it really hard to do that. So my personal growth process, my own quest, is of being progressively more integrated and progressively more whole over time. And that's how I end up talking about what it means to be a man, because that's what I am. So it's a natural spilling out of what's been in me for a long time.
Yeah. Wow. No, it's such it's so relatable. And I feel like I'm on a similar sort of journey, and the people I feel like I'm best able to help or to serve are just kind of the versions of who I was a few years ago, or where I was feeling stuck at that phase or at that time. Right. So let's talk about the masculinity piece here. That's been more recent, a more recent focus for you. And we met actually through Carl, who I mentioned earlier, at a retreat. And you came in, and immediately I think Carl had said like, oh yeah, you got to meet Dallas. He does men's coaching. He does all this men's work. He's doing the male archetypes. And I was immediately kind of like, oh shoot, like this guy probably needs to get up and present. Right. But you came in just with a really open mind and heart, and I appreciated that a lot, especially with your research and your expertise. And we did talk about the 4 male archetypes that are probably most well-known in this sphere, in this space. And Carl Jung was the creator of those, as far as I'm aware, but then it was further developed by I'm forgetting that Gillette,
And more.
and more. Yeah. And so there's just a whole body of work around that. And for one, I think those are really helpful and they're interesting and they're useful. And I know that from our brief conversation, you were kind of, I don't know if you'd say you were challenging those or maybe broadening, or let's dive in there.
Sure.
Like, yeah, let's start with that.
So the book you're referring to is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Yes, those are the four
from back in 1990. And I think that is a profound and important, kind of lens to look at masculinity through.
Yeah.
I think I'm intending to both broaden and challenge that model. And, to be clear, Gillette and Moore's work based on all of the Jungian psychology, if I can improve that conversation even the slightest bit, I'll be standing on the shoulders of giants. This is not my own original work.
Yeah.
But I do think, having read King, Warrior, Magician, Lover a bunch of times and a lot of the surrounding work, one of the things that came to me, and this is where my previous work in nutrition and wellness more generally is relevant, what helped me help people in the nutrition realm was zooming out from the world that we currently exist in and asking the question, what world did we develop in as human beings? And so, as I said just a minute ago, from a nutrition standpoint, what should humans eat? Well, the things that have been around a really long time, a really, really long time. And I think that same conclusion I bring to the conversation about masculine archetypes. Like, what are men? What should we be? What fundamental energies and archetypes can and should we express? And the answer to me is the ones that have been around a really, really long time. And I guess my concern and my critique of Gillette and Moore's work is that it's all based on recorded history. So it's all based on the last 6,000 to 12,000 years of civilized human history, which is the same fundamental flaw in the nutrition approach of grain-based agriculture and the sort of like evolution of that over the last several millennia into the world now, which is totally unrecognizable to our bodies. And so in the same sense, our spirits, our souls, our hearts, our minds don't know how to make sense of the world that we exist in today. So the existence of a warrior class or a warrior identity and a king as sort of the leader, even if he's a good, benevolent king, that hierarchical approach is something that I largely reject. Because the large body of anthropology work suggests that humans, for most of our history, were largely egalitarian.
Yeah.
That there was not a really large wealth and power disparity between the top and the bottom, and that men of all ages had different capacities and different abilities and different skills to contribute to the larger tribe, the larger whole. But it wasn't in the service of self-development or the individual. It was all about the collective.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the lens that I look at this thing through. So with King and Warrior being essentially relatively new civilizational ideas, the question I ask in looking at that model through the anthropology lens is like, well, what predates those? What was there before? Because while the premise is relatively new, there is something older behind it. And so for relatively young men, young, physically capable, able-bodied, competent young men, the archetype that I identified as older and beneath the warrior is the hunter. So it's still that same young, focused, disciplined, capable, protect and provide kind of energy that the warrior would bring, but in a much more compassionate and community-oriented sense. In this world, in the modern world, the warrior culture has become one of glory, self-sacrifice, and kind of seeking a kind of, the hero's journey is in a lot of the modern literature is one of seeking immortality through personal legacy. I reject that as a endpoint, as an interesting place, as an interesting way to live my life across the course of decades. It's a natural developmental stage. It's normal and healthy for a relatively young man to go through that. but it is just the beginning of mature masculinity, not the end, not the entirety. And I think that's one of the major mistakes we've made. So the 4 archetypes as I see them, and I kind of actually add 5 because I place the boy as that foundational, that developmental piece, that we should bring forward into our whole lives. The curious energy, the playfulness, the open-heartedness, the tenderness, and the awareness that we are connected to everything. When there's when I was 5 and out in the forest exploring stuff, like there was this magic to everything. Everything shimmered in this really amazing way. And I don't want to lose that. That's a piece that I think we sever ourselves off from. We're like, well, I'm not a child anymore. I'm a man, I'm an adult, and I'm going to go forward. But I think that all of these archetypal energies are things that we should continue to glean from as we mature.
Yeah.
And so it's a transcend and include, like bring them forward with us and expand ourselves to be able to contain all of those things, as opposed to a chapter that we close and leave behind.
Yeah.
So there's the boy, there's the hunter. And just like Gillette and Moore write about, then there's the lover. And the lover then there's the magician, which you could call the shaman, the magician. There's lots of different kind of labels you can put on that. That's a much more inward, much more personal space. It's one of looking and being like, ooh, what is all that in there that I have largely ignored in my earlier life? So it's a very vulnerable space. It can be a very lonely space, but lonely in a getting to know yourself kind of way, not in a isolated, closed off way. It's also a space of connectedness to things much larger than ourselves, to ancestors, to the universe, to God, to community, And then there's the developmental stage, and I'm doing these in sequence. There's the developmental stage of the lover, which is really the sort of the large, warm, soft, open, tender expression of a man when he's whole, because the hunter space is largely one of mastery of the physical world, the outer world. Protect, provide. You do the thing, you create something. Maybe you're a parent. And that's a very outward and physical world. And the world of the alchemist or the shaman or the magician is a very inward facing space. And it's probably the one that men today are the least interested in going into, because it's scary and it's lonely. And the way culture talks about masculinity, it very much poo-poos that, right? I mean, this is the work that you guys do so powerfully in your retreats, is you invite men into that space. It's not, and I so appreciated this about the retreat, it's not tough guy cold plunges and burpees and proving how, like, it's not the like, I want to be hard, I want to be tough. Like, there's lots of that out there. And usually when men are open to doing real work, it's that leaning into that inner space. And so when you have sort of mastery and comfort and competence in both the outer world and the inner world, what you have is a fusion. You have this integrated man that can move into this open-hearted space of the lover that is tender, that doesn't see vulnerability as weakness, and that can love everything. It's not... we think of lover, it's a kind of a funny label. We think of them as like a Don Juan kind of philandering guy, but the lover is a lover of all things. And it's a lover of children and animals and beauty and magic and partners and family, and like it's a lover of everything. And as I talk about these things, something to kind of track is like how rare each of these gets, progressively more rare in the people that I know. And so instead of the king being the culmination of that sequence, I think it's an elder. So the elder is the word I use for that.
Nice.
So the elder is less interested in a hierarchical rule and much more interested in integration into the community, leadership, contribution, and contribution beyond one's own lifetime. I think elders can and should be an intergenerational bridge between ancestors' wisdom past and advocating for future generations, and they themselves kind of dissolve away a little bit. So instead of being a focal king where it's like this pinnacle of, leadership and being prominent, I think the elder actually starts to dissolve away in front of your eyes. It's kind of the guru, the trick where the guru dissolves in front of you and you become your own guru. And so my model then is boy, hunter, magician, or alchemist, lover, and elder. And so it's not just 4 archetypes that you can pull from, although you can, but there is also a developmental sequence there. And that's one of the other differences with king, warrior, magician, lover, is I have a developmental sequence that I build in.
Very cool.
So that's all of that.
Wow. No, there's so much good stuff there. And one of the things that I'm curious about, I mean, one, just that that you have it sort of as a developmental progression. That to me is interesting. And I'm wondering if, behavioral development, psychological development, like there's all kinds of research and models out there of what happens at these various stages. Was that all informing these archetypes?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so, I use the word archetype a little bit carefully because it has that sort of Jungian history, that lineage. I use it a little bit differently. I use it a little bit as this sort of an energy, a stage, a focal point, a thing that we're doing. It's a little bit amorphous, but through it, it is a crucible for mastery of a particular realm.
Yeah.
So the hunter's mastery is in the physical realm.
Yeah.
And that is true of young men too, right? Like, I occasionally will have mothers write to me on Instagram and they'll be like, oh, what should I do to get my college age son to get to know himself more deeply? And I was like, nothing. Let him be where he is now, which is largely a focus on that physical outer realm. Let him do the protect and provide and create thing, because that's the stage he's in. It's not to say that the other things aren't important, but it would be trying to sort of forcibly accelerate him into a place that isn't actually natural for him right now. And I tell him, I'm like, don't worry, life will provide ample opportunities for him to be thrust into a different realm when the time is right. Like, the soul will lead you there, usually against your will, or certainly against the ego's desires. But life has a way of taking you to those places, and you can avoid it and you can resist it for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what most men in this culture do, is they avoid doing some of that stuff. And I'm thrilled that more men are leaning into the sort of men's workspace, which is really acknowledgement that what they've been doing hasn't been working and that they need to do something different. And very often I am not sure what that next thing is, like what needs to be different, but something needs to be different. So a lot of exploration there. But I work with men who are in their 50s and 60s who are still fixated on the protect and provide, young man, hunter, warrior kind of stuff. And I was like, that's one of the great tragedies of modern culture, is we've convinced men that that's their only job, that they're valuable for what they can do, what they can produce. And we've told them protect and provide. It's this trope that we do. And it's important, and it's a really important thing that men need to do in society, but it's only an early developmental stage. And then we sort of like close it, and then men that go through psychological breakdown, mental health crisis, midlife crisis, we kind of like
identity.
We kind of like look at them out of the corner of our eye and sort of malign them and quietly mock them, and I think that's cruel. And I'm thrilled to see more men willing to be like, I need to do something differently, and I'm not sure what it is, so like, let's go on an adventure and find out.
Yeah. Okay, another thought that keeps coming up for me is the 4 archetypes, as I'm familiar with them, have these, they're called the bipolar shadows of each. Is that a part of, because this one being a little more of like a progression, it feels like maybe it's not the same kind of approach, but thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is and it isn't.
Okay.
So again, this is kind of where mine is like more loosely Jungian rather than specifically Jungian. The shadow having a pretty specific definition in that realm.
Yeah.
I don't use that word an awful lot.
Sure.
But I'm actually working on a book right now, and the third part of the book is about the distorted archetypes, which would correspond to those shadow expressions. And I'll try to keep this one short, but there are 4 primary distorted masculine archetypes. And the first one, and this also roughly tracks that developmental
Mm-hmm.
sequence.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is the man-child.
Yeah.
Man-child, and we use that, and I use that in the book manuscript specifically because we say it tongue-in-cheek in kind of a demeaning way. It's not a complimentary thing.
Right.
This is not us having boyish energy and curiosity. Like
Right.
that's not that thing.
Like
right?
the good childlike attributes
Totally.
that I actually heard a lot when you were talking about the I think it was the magician,
Yeah.
where there was this kind of curiosity and this, and even in the elder, I mean, I felt like
It carries
those,
all the way through.
yeah,
totally.
that like the best attributes of childlike
Totally.
beings, right?
Right.
So okay, go ahead.
But the man-child is a man who has resisted all maturation and development.
Mm.
Like he wants things to be fun and light and easy,
Mm-hmm.
and really has had difficulty in moving through some of these developmental stages,
Maybe
which is really
avoidant of responsibility.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely, that's exactly right.
yeah.
And so these are failures of culture and family to initiate boys into men and men into deeper stages of maturation. So
Mhm.
all of these distorted archetypes are stuck stages.
Yeah.
So they're all the healthy archetypes are all important to grow through. But if we get stuck at any one of them, they tend to putrefy and distort into something that becomes, instead of being adaptive, becomes really dark and maladaptive.
Yeah.
So the man-child is that boy who absolutely refused to take on a man's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the guys who are allergic to responsibility and allergic to commitment in romantic relationships. And they just want things to be light and easy and carefree, and maybe they want to live the van life, or they want to be a ski bum or whatever, but like they're just resistant to taking on the mantle of adult male responsibility, which is, I am accountable to something larger and more important than myself. And the man-child would be the example of that, like deeply selfish, like I'm only going to do what feels good for me, and I'm going to shirk responsibility for larger things. Then there's a failure of initiation or a failure of transition. And I haven't mentioned initiation yet, but the transition from boyhood into manhood, the fundamental shift there in that initiation is a reorientation of the center of gravity from inside myself to outside myself. And in hunter-gatherer tribes, that really looks like taking on responsibility for the tribe and making that your primary center of gravity. And that has to be done to boys forcibly and against their will, because they don't want to do that. They don't want to make that change. So initiations, we think about sometimes in the modern world as stages or steps of personal development. And the author Francis Weller talks about initiation. He's like, they don't give a shit about personal development. Like everything is in the service of the tribe, of the larger, of the collective. And I think that's something we get wrong with personal growth, personal development, maturation, initiations in the modern conversation there, is that we're like, how do I become a better man? But really the question should be, how do I become a better servant, caretaker, contributor, storyteller, lover, wisdom keeper? Like it's a much bigger and more expansive thing than how do I become a better man or a more self-actualized version of myself. It's still a very individualistic perspective. So the failure of that transition, the death of the boy without the rebirth of the man, creates a very zombie-like existence. The zombie then is that sort of caricatured archetype. And you just you live a life that is relatively devoid of energy and passion and what the Greeks would call eros, right? It's like life force. Yeah. And the zombies are plentiful in our society. They're kind of the backbone of extractive capitalism. They are the workforce. And there is a gray, lifeless, monotone quality that, and if you think about, you probably know some of these people, because they're all over the place. And that is a failure of initiation from boyhood to manhood. The corresponding distorted archetype that goes along with the hunter, the young man, the protect and provide, that like physically oriented, strong, capable, disciplined, focused energy, that distortion is the werewolf. So again, I'm using caricatures, right? I'm using like exaggerated things. But the werewolf confuses personal power with contribution.
Mm.
And so werewolves are indeed formidable
Right.
people,
Yeah.
men in this
Yeah.
case. They're formidable. They're often very physically capable, very strong. They rely on other people's fear,
Mm.
or at least intimidation of them, as like that's one of their primary strategies. And they move through the world like a bulldozer. And we know people like that too. And there's fewer of them, but they are formidable.
Mm-hmm.
And really, werewolves exist. Their currency is violence or the threat of violence.
Mm.
And that can be physical violence. It can also just be psycho-emotional violence. It can
Sure.
be somebody, you're afraid, you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around them because they might blow up at any moment. Even if they never have in the past, you get that feeling from them. Like they have a bit of a wounded animal feeling where like you kind of have to be a bit careful because you don't quite know what's going on. And they're in that very grounded in that physical world, but they were the ones who became that capable young man, that hunter warrior, but kind of got stuck and kind of got distorted and putrefied in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And the last of the distorted archetypes is the vampire. And the vampire corresponds to that alchemist, magician, shaman space. So they're much more psychologically and emotionally aware and intelligent.
Capable.
Very, very capable.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that makes the vampire, I think, to me, terrifying and probably the most dangerous of any of these distortions is that they hide in plain sight. They look like all the rest of us. They're upstanding members of society. They're intelligent and well-spoken, and they know how to nuance and navigate a room, often because they're standing on the stage in front of the room.
Sure.
And they have gone into that interior space of awareness of themselves, awareness of others, what makes people tick, and they've emerged learning more skills with how to manipulate the world. But again, the fundamental thread through all of the distorted archetypes is they are only serving themselves.
Right.
And so their ability to create destruction in the world is immense. It's immense.
Wow.
So there's and these are not categorical, right? There are men who have strong hunter and alchemist energies. They tend to be men who have done a good amount of personal work, and they're kind of in the middle of their lives. There are a few, very, very few men who have like well-developed elder energies who've done all of this development and carried that all the way through. One of the questions I often ask my coaching clients is, when you think of a man that you would like to be just like when you are in your 70s or 80s or nearing the end of your life, like how many men do you know that you want to be like just like them? And the most common answer is 0. And the second most common answer is 1, maybe. Because masculine development is disincentivized in our culture. Culture at large feeds off of men, well-intentioned, good men, working hard, doing what they're told, and only realizing in the later parts of their life that they were told a lie, that they were told the wrong thing. So men become, a large group of energy-rich, capable, amazing humans that get extracted from forever, and that makes me really mad. So there's like an anger piece to my work too, is that there is a large-scale injustice, not to men in a like victim sense, because the extractive culture does it to everybody. But I'm a man, so I write and talk to men.
Oh, that was so good. No, I'm so intrigued by those. By the archetypes as you described them, and the developmental stages of kind of a trajectory, right? A transitioning from each one to the next. But then also, what does it look like instead of sort of the bipolar shadow, which I found those to be really fascinating too, right? Just a lot of kind of self-awareness in that, like where you talked about the vampire being really manipulative, and that's one of the bipolar shadows of the magician is they have this wisdom and this capacity, and then they're using it for some ulterior motive that's ultimately selfish, right? And then there's the other side of it, which is actually I can't remember that one, but something
I can't actually remember that one either. But yes, you're tracking.
Yes,
you're tracking for sure.
And the way that you used kind of these iconic monsters of our culture and
Yeah.
to associate those with the I guess underdeveloped or no, you called it the kind of the corrupted, right?
Distorted
The
archetypes.
distorted,
Yeah.
yeah. Really interesting. Like
Well,
this
because
is
they're not.
fascinating to me.
It's not evil, right? This is
Yeah.
the thing that, and we
Well,
use.
say more about that.
Yeah. So the distorted archetypes. Well, I'll back up. So it's my view that soul wants us to grow into the biggest, best, most amazing, most contributive version of ourselves. Not in an individualistic sense, but in a like, what can I be in the world? What can I give to the world? How can I serve? And so that developmental sequence can be impeded or stopped entirely by all kinds of different things, whether it's childhood trauma or cultural messaging or whatever. So the putrefaction, the distortion that happens there is arrested development. It's stagnation of energy that wants to push you forward, and there's something else preventing that forward motion. But whether it is a man going through his life in a relatively flat, listless, low energy zombie kind of way, like that's not evil. That's a tragic failure of initiation and development. And similarly, even though the werewolf and especially the vampire have a larger catastrophic destructive potential, and because they're so much more influential and powerful, inside there is a wounded boy.
Yeah.
And he's trying to make his way in the world, and he's doing so he's pulling whatever levers he has to salve the wounds, to fill the void, very often that's done without his own self-awareness.
Right.
Because once you start to see clearly what you're doing and especially why you're doing it, it's way harder to keep doing it. It becomes excruciating to continue doing the same thing. So the actions of any of these people can indeed be catastrophically destructive and painful to themselves and people around them. But to me, that is a function of a maladaptive strategy, rather than a core evil that they have.
Yes. No, I think that's so well said and really important to recognize, because then even the way that we view and judge others is more through a lens of compassion rather than, just villainizing people, which is so common. Like we see that in the news, and there's just such a tendency to want to label something as just pure evil or a monster or whatever, when really it's a wounded being trying to fill a need through a counterfeit or destructive pattern or choice, right? Behavior. If you could speak a little bit about this idea of initiation, is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Or the transition to stages, like how do you think of that in our modern culture where it's not naturally sort of a part of a tribe?
Yeah, I mean, it's been stripped out of our world.
Yeah.
Kind of, I say deliberately, not by one individual or group of individuals, but adaptively, as the world has become so much more industrialized and mechanized and civilized, society, and particularly the economic system and the political systems that we have, benefits when men give away some of their developmental power. And so the maturation process there is one of continuing to grow into progressively more and more power. And I use that word kind of carefully because it often means something different. But really, what I'm trying to get men to be able to do, I'm trying to kind of empower men to do, is to be the largest version of themselves, which is why you don't close a chapter and leave it behind. You pick it up and carry it with you. And so what happens is your mass as a human grows, your capacities, the spaces you can sit in and know about and ultimately master grow. If you've ever sat in the space of a true wise elder, they have mass. Like you can feel the mass, and it's not because they're loud and showy, but they have quiet influence and quiet mass. So initiation is just moving between those developmental stages. So the initiation that we most think of as the kind of boy to man initiation, the first one, and that really involves a symbolic death of the child, an infusion of cultural and spiritual and intellectual learnings from a group of older men So this is like in the tribal hunter-gatherer sense, this would be fathers and grandfathers and uncles and elders of the tribe, teaching a boy to become something different than he currently is, which is a self-interested, narcissistic, destructive adolescent. And those are normal things. Like, say those things like a little bit playfully, but like those are normal things for an adolescent boy to be, but they have to be forcibly changed. They don't come from within us, they come from outside of us. And so the absence of a culture of masculine elders leading boys through that initiatory threshold to become something that carries more responsibility and accountability to the collective is something that we've lost entirely. It's not present. And I think that is one of the single largest problems, because if you stop development there, most of the other developmental stages are naturally impeded or stopped entirely. But there are initiations between all of those developmental stages. So between the hunter and the alchemist, it's a recognition that the strategies of protect and provide and create, the like hard work, the discipline, the focus, those strategies don't work in the interior world. You can't force your way, discipline, focus your way through heartbreak, depression, anxiety, loss of a relationship, loss of a loved one. Like, the hunter's strategies don't work in the interior world. And so you have to recognize that and be able to learn a new way of navigating a totally new space. And so, again, that crisis, that failure, that pain point is what throws men into this initiation and next developmental stage. It comes from the outside. And I think this is one of the interesting and fundamental different things between men and women, developmentally speaking, is that because, as we talked about at the very beginning, everything's based in the body, right? This is the vehicle that we experience the world through. And I believe that to be true for girls and women as well. But for girls and women, they have biological process that naturally transition girls into becoming a woman with the onset of menses, their first period. And for some women, they have the experience of carrying and birthing a child. So there's the creation stage that moves them through that. And they also have the end of menstruation. So they have, menopause. And so there's natural, very body-based foundational things that happen spontaneously from within them. Men don't have any of those things. So it has to be put upon us from the outside, whether it's a group of male elders when we are when we're becoming men and reorganizing or replacing that center of gravity onto the collective instead of ourselves. But then there's like getting into the alchemist space and having a whole new set of things there. And there's sort of initiatory thresholds all along the way. So initiations are forced adaptations to a new way of being that we don't yet have.
That's fascinating. Have you explored I realize we're short on time, but have you explored the feminine and like the archetypes for women in a similar fashion?
Slightly, kind of.
Okay.
I mostly stay in my lane. I've read a ton of books in that space. There's lots of different perspectives there as well. I don't speak about it because I'm not even a master of the masculine spaces, so I'll stay away from things that I'm doubly not an expert on. It's super interesting stuff. I think there's a lot of interplay between those,
for sure,
especially in that sort of developmental sense. But in terms of writing and speaking, I stay in my lane.
Yeah. No, it's just a curiosity of like seeing the parallels there, and then the relationship between the masculine and the feminine in that way is pretty fascinating. But no, this was so interesting. Like I would love to keep digging into all of this, but it sounds like you are working on the book about all of this right now.
I am
in the process of finding publishers and all of that.
All that fun stuff.
Wish you the best of luck in that, because
thank you so much.
Once this becomes published and is out there, I think I'll be really curious to dig into it. I think it's been a rich conversation. I see myself in some of these things that you shared, and then also potential, and I think that's just really cool to have a little bit more of. I think a lot of men right now are lacking like a roadmap, a path. What am I supposed to be, and who do I become? And I think things like this are can just be such useful frames of reference and for awareness too. I mean, the bipolar shadows, when I first read about those, that was so eye-opening for me. because I saw myself in
Same.
all of them.
I was like, I don't like this at all,
Right.
but it's true. Yeah.
But it was like so beneficial at the same time, just
sure.
to see those things, right? Not that I'm always wanting to like focus on the shadow side, but it is a point of reference and a point of awareness to say, oh, I can notice this. And for
Right.
me, like that awareness is the beginning of all of our progression, our growth, our development. And so, yeah, thank you so much for just shedding more awareness through the work you're doing, through these insights. I've found it fascinating, and I hope we get to keep talking about it in the future. So
Thank you so much.
thanks for coming on. Yeah,
Absolutely.
appreciate it.